Good afternoon. Again, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. This is really going to be a very dynamic panel, and having had the opportunity many years back to have been sitting in one of those seats when we do these senior enlisted panels at FC at USNI West. So clearly this is an engaging conversation for both the people out in the audience as well as from the panel up here. But I'm up here really to introduce to you the moderator, who really comes from my end, needs very little introduction, not just a very close friend, but a former neighbor. When during my tenure as Master Chief of the Coast Guard, he was Master Chief of the Navy. He retired in 2002, as did I, after 35 years of service as the Master Chief Petty Officer, as the 9th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. He is presently the CEO of Herdt Consulting, providing assistance in public and private sector clients in the navigating their most complex business and organizing challenges. And also, not in his bio, but of course I'll make mention of the fact is that both he and I, as well as the guys that served when we served together during our tenure as Senior Enlisted Advisor, the Master Chief, in addition to Master Chief of the Navy, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, and Sergeant Major of the Army. We stuck together after retirement, and we have formed a group called Pinnacle 5, and working very closely with being an advocate for the military and veteran community. So without any further discussion, I'd like to introduce to you all my best friend, Jim Herdt.
Well, good afternoon, and what he meant to say, I believe, is we've been around for a long time. We're just getting old. It was a long time ago that Vince and I set up on this very same, not this very same stage, but a stage like this at the AFCEA conference, and participated in a panel like this. So I guess it's karma that I'm now back. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. Mission first, people always. How are we making it work? There's just no denying our men and women serving today are the most technically capable, the most militarily professional our services have ever produced. Every one of them a volunteer who stepped forward to accept the challenge of service to country. These are the men and women who've borne the battle and increased top tempo for over a decade of war. It is they who've put mission first. Yet leadership knows accomplishing mission is first dependent on those who execute mission. Thus it must be people always. Keeping mission first and people always is a challenge for every generation of warfighter. Perhaps that challenge has never been greater than it is today. Leadership today is challenged to do so in nearly any direction they turn. This is certainly a timely and important topic to explore here today. To explore the topic, we could not be better served nor more honored to have the panelists we have with us today. I present to you, on my left, the 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, Mike Stevens, the 12th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Steve Cantrell, and filling in for the 17th Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, Mike Barrett, who's a little busy right now doing turnover with his relief, is the very capable Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps Manpower and Reserve Affairs, Grant VanOostrom. I think we can agree we have the experts on this topic here with us today. The order of battle for the discussion is, first, I will ask each panel member to make opening remarks, beginning with MCPON Stevens, then MCPOG Cantrell, and then Sergeant Major VanOostrom. Next, I will pose a question to each in the same order. After they initially answer the question, any panel member wishing to add to the answer may do so. And then I hope by that time it will have generated a lot of questions from the audience, and we will turn to the audience for questions. So without further ado, MCPON Stevens, would you like to lead off?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I was just looking at these really nice pins that USNI put up here. If nothing else, I'll leave here with a really nice pin, right?
Very heavy.
Yeah, I'm cheap, right? Well, thanks for the opportunity. I'm not sure that I hope I'm thanking the right person, but this is the person that called me directly and invited me. It was retired Vice Admiral Daly. We served together at U.S. Fleet Forces Command. Now, as everyone knows, he's at USNI. So, Admiral, thanks for the call, the email, and the opportunity to come out here and speak at this event today. Very much appreciated. I really came here for two reasons. Flew into you don't need much of a reason to come from San Diego, from Washington, D.C., other than the weather, but came here today to do two things, and that was visit with our LCS sailors out on the waterfront. And we did that this morning, had a great visit with about 500 of our sailors. We did an all-hands call. We got a chance to go into their new simulator training organization where they're doing all the simulator training for the LCS, which was quite impressive. And then to come out here and have a conversation with all of you. There's much to talk about, and there's a lot going on, as you know, and we probably have little time to discuss it. So rather than continue with my opening remarks, I think I will, hopefully, we will allow the questions to continue the conversation. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to hearing from you. And to my good friend, Jim Herdt, I look forward to you moderating this. I don't know what to expect, Jim, but I suspect it'll be tough questions. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my good friend, Rick West, 12th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, sitting in front. You know, nothing like having two former MCPONs grading your performance at an event like this, right? But thank you very much, Jim.
Well, thank you for recognizing that Rick was here. I'll never hear the end of it, that I failed to recognize that he was here. Master Chief Cantrell.
Well, good afternoon, y'all. How we doing? I wanted to say thanks first to AFCEA and the U.S. Naval Institute for continuing to include the United States Coast Guard in their efforts to promote the sea services. And I'm really honored to be up here with MCPON Stevens and our Sergeant Major here, two terrific leaders that I know we're going to have some great conversation. And as with MCPON, I'm anxious to hear what's on your mind. And I got to say first, I'm really impressed with the turnout for the United States Coast Guard. This is the third event this year that I've done, and you guys have really set the bar high. So thank you all for being here and for what you do every single day. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the Coast Guard in a global and let people know where your United States Coast Guard serves, because a lot of people simply don't know that the Coast Guard serves on all 7 continents, doing our 11 statutory missions, from law enforcement, drug interdiction, ice breaking, defense ops, maritime security, you name it, the Coast Guard's out there doing it. We do this as the smallest armed service. And as our theme, mission first, people always, how do we get it done? I have to say that we get it done with the innovative and creative workforce that continue to line up at the recruiting offices and raise their hands to come into our service, even though we live in a time of continuous global conflict. So I'm excited to be representing this workforce. I'm excited to hear your questions, and I'm really excited to be here with this panel. I thank them for their service and their leadership, and I thank you, all that wear the uniform in the audience, all that have worn the uniform, for your service and your sacrifice. Look forward to some good conversation.
Yeah, I too recognize that there's a lot of light blue shirts out there, more so than any of the other color shirts that we're used to seeing out there. So I'm just wondering, were you all paid to come here today or what?
Vince guilted us into it.
Yeah, it was Vince, I know. Okay, Sergeant Major VanOostrom.
Thank you, MCPON. Distinguished guests, men and women who wear the cloth of our nation, to MCPON Stevens and McCog Cantrell, thank you for allowing me to be part of this with you today. Sergeant Major Barrett sends his regrets. As MCPON Herdt said, he's currently in the middle of turning over with our 18th designee, Sergeant Major Ron Green, who just turned over 1 meth. And so I was asked to come here and did so with flying colors. And to those that helped me get settled in about a week, I appreciate it. I'm going to take it a little bit differently because of the topic, which said it was mission first, people always, how do we make it work? As a Manpower Reserve Affairs Sergeant Major, people is our business. It's our business and everything that we do. So I've kind of made a little bit of some small notes that I just would like to read when we talk about the United States Marine Corps, because we are the smallest of all the services. We are busy, and the world's not getting any nicer. It's volatile, it's unstable, and it's complex. The fiscal environment is uncertain. We're drawing down. And today, as I address you, the United States Marine Corps has over 32,000 Marines in 29 countries, ready, relevant, forward deployed, forward engaged, shaping and training, deterring aggression, responding to every crisis, conflict, and contingency around the globe. We have the people, we have the tools, and the training to stand at a door. We can knock on it diplomatically, we can pick the lock skillfully, or we can smash it violently. Your Marine Corps is innovative, adaptable, and versatile. We have 3 MEUs afloat, 2 Special Purpose MAGTF crisis response forward staged, over 21,000 Marines west of the international date line, spread out across the Pacific Rim. We have Marines supporting regional and theater security cooperation missions with partner nations, and we're ready to respond as directed across the full range of military operations. Whether it's HADR, TRAP, Tactical Recovery Aircraft, personnel, non-combatant evacuations. We're laser focused and we're working overtime to stay balanced across our pillars of readiness, which are high quality people, which I think is very relevant today, unit readiness, equipment modernization, infrastructure sustainment, and providing the capability and capacity to our COCOM requirements. These are exciting and emotional times. In the last 13 years of continuous sustained combat operations, 1,230 Marines have made the ultimate sacrifice. 13,581 have given of their blood, their body parts, and in great instances, their minds. Your Marines are indomitable in crisis, fearsome in battle, compassionate in spirit, and generous in manner. Let us not lose focus. We may have less, but it doesn't mean that we'll do less, nor will America allow us to do it less well. Mission first, people always. Thanks for this opportunity. I look forward to answering some questions.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. We'll now start with questions. I'll ask each panel member a question, and then we will begin taking questions from the audience, and we will continue to do so as long as we can. Just want to let you know I do have some additional questions if we run out. MCPON Stevens, as the enlisted leader of your service, one of your most important jobs is to proactively begin building into the force those skills and attributes that will be called for 10 to 15 years in the future. What are some of those things you see out there in that time frame that will require you begin taking action now?
Well, it's a good question, Jim, and to be honest with you, we've already started taking action on many of the things that are on my mind that I think are important as we build our force into the future. Technology is a funny thing in the sense that at one time we had a monopoly on it. And as time has gone on, other nations have begun to capture that same technology and in many cases have caught up to us or looking to catch up to us sometime in the near future. And we work very hard with industry and others to ensure that we maintain that technology edge. But it's undeniable that it's closing. As CNO and I talk about all the time with our sailors is the one thing that we have that folks that would wish to do us harm don't, is that we have, and I'll speak for the Navy, we have the American sailor. The American sailor is our asymmetric advantage. That's what gives us the edge. And when you talk to these other nations, they will always gravitate towards that part of the discussion. What do we need to do and how do we create more of you, is what they ask. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to do to ensure that they remain the asymmetric advantage? Technology aside. And what we need to do is we need to ensure that number one is that they have the best leadership that they can, that we could possibly deliver to them, and frankly that they should expect and demand from us. So we're continuously looking at how we can better leverage our leadership training that's in place so that they can become better led, more efficient, and more effective. Because really it all starts and it all stops with leadership. You can have the best equipment in the world and you can have the best people in the world, but if they're not properly led and they're not good leaders themselves, then in many ways they become ineffective. Next is we got to make sure that we put in their hands the technology that allows them to do their job, can carry out their mission in the best possible way. And I'm not talking about weapons technology. Obviously that's important, but I want to talk about technology in training and personnel management. And one of the things that we're working on right now in the Navy, sometime in early April, we're going to roll out an initiative called eSailor. An eSailor is going to be a mobile device that will be issued to 200 recruits at Recruit Training Command Great Lakes. And on that device, we will download all their training curriculum. Everything that they currently get that's in paper will be loaded electronically. This is really the tip of the iceberg with regards to training, because we visualize that one day, and it's not a matter of if this will happen, it's a matter of when it will happen, because it will happen. One day, a sailor will sign up in the delayed entry program, and we will issue them mobile technology. And it will become their career companion. And everything that they do with regards to personnel and personnel training, and in some cases it could affect maintenance or even weapon systems, will be involved in this mobile technology. And as many of you may know, mobile technology isn't so much about the device, it's about where that information is stored up there in that cloud, right? So we're working on that. We realize that this is something that we must do so that we can continue to evolve and ensure our sailors have all the things that they need in the future to be an effective force. So there's where I work and what I deal with every day, it's primarily developing leaders, and it's getting this mobile technology in their hands. There's many other things that we work on, but those are two big focus areas aside from weapon systems. So thanks for your question. There's a lot more to that, and I hope that there's some questions on it. But in the spirit of time, I'll put a period at the end of that paragraph.
MCPOG, Sergeant Major, do you have anything to add? No? Okay. MCPOG Cantrell, how would you rate the stress on the force to that you've seen or experienced at any other point in your career today?
Well, I'll speak for the Coast Guard, and I'll tell you, it has never been more stressful in the United States Coast Guard than it is right now, with declining budgets, and we ask our young Coast Guardsmen to serve on ships that are older than their parents, and they continue to rise to the occasion to keep these things running. But it comes at their expense. It comes at their work life. They spend an awful lot of time on maintenance, and we forget about those things like MCPON Stevens talks about, where we have to develop them into our reliefs and the leaders of tomorrow. Now, that being said, we also have some new ships that are very, very a lot of technology with those, that are coming online as we speak. But we've got to operate these older ships, some of them upwards of 60 years, for probably another decade. And that's asking an awful lot of a young man or woman to come into our service and operate in those violent conditions that our Coast Guard operate in sometimes to get that mission done. But it's in their DNA. They want to do this, and they work really hard, and they don't know how to say no. But we've got to invest, I think, America has to invest in our innovation programs, because these kids are smart and they want to do well, but we can't continue to ask them to do more with less. As a matter of fact, our Commandant has made that very clear, that he will not ask our folks to do more with less. So we have to recognize that as leaders, that our workforce is stressed, and pay attention to that and make sure that these folks have the tools they need to be successful tomorrow and not leave our service because of our old technology and our old assets.
MCPON, Sergeant Major, any follow-up comments?
No.
No? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two microphones, one in this aisle and one in this aisle over here. As Sergeant Major is responding to this last question I have for them before we start taking questions from the audience, I'd invite you to start lining up with your questions. You won't bother us, please. Sergeant Major, how would you rate the professionalism of the force today as it relates to that of any other point in your career?
Thank you for that question. I think it's it's kind of a combination of what we've already heard from MCPON and from MCOG. With the foundation is its people. We're requiring more, we're demanding more, and our young Marines, and again speaking just to Marines, are delivering more. Because I think that what we have to remember and what we'll stay focused on is that the individual folks serving their country today, they're competent, they're committed, they're constantly dependable. They're cut from the highest moral and ethical character, and everything they do is for a cause greater than themselves. They focus on mission accomplishment, they focus on selfless service of others, and they won't quit because failure is not an option. Their leadership and their teamwork skills are forged in the most chaotic and stressing complex environments, but yet they run to the guns. I think that, like all previous decades, there has been a challenge. And for the last 13, our military has faced those challenges. And while less than 1%, and you've heard this before, less than 1% that could serve in the military do, the Marine Corps is an actual probably 1/10 or a little bit smaller than that 1%, but yet the entire country enjoys their benefits. So I can't speak to the stress that happened, prior to 1985. I can say that it's been continuous and ongoing for all the services. And at any given time, you could take a knee and catch your breath. But for the last 13, we've been delivering because the nation's been calling. But we've battled those stresses by putting together programs, whether it's Marine and Family programs, whether it's Marine and Family counselors, because what we've talked to our Marines and sailors that serve with Marines is that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to ask for help, because at the end of the day, it's about getting you back to being a full-up Brown, ready to meet the needs and the requirements that the nation demands of you. So that'd be my answer to that question, MCPON.
Great answer. Any follow-up comments?
No.
No? Okay, sir. First question.
Yeah, hi, Scott Kinner with the Marine Corps Tactics and Operations Group. This is for the panel, even though I'm tempted to make it Marine Corps only. But my question is op-tempo. There's a paradox, which is we are demanding ever more from our people. So when you look at what we're writing to ourselves across the services, the naval services anyway, which is we need more capable people, better trained, more mature, better squad leaders, better chiefs. But at the same time, we are now basically coming to a point where 1 to 2 dwell time is the new norm. So from a manpower model, and what are your gentlemen's take on how are we going to solve that paradox? How are we going to actually train our force and develop our force to be better individuals, at the same time they're home less and less?
Good question. Who would like to take it?
Sure, I'll dive in here, be brave. We recognize that. I mean, operational tempo has been extraordinarily high for a long period of time. And we recognize we cannot sustain the pace, or at least the operational model, I should say, that we're currently on. We don't have the opportunity to say we're not going to deploy. What we have to do is figure out how to best do it. And we've decided in the Navy that we were going to take an approach, and we're calling it OFRP. So it's the Optimized Fleet Response Plan. And there's much that goes into this, but it's essentially how we train, how we prepare, how we deploy, and how we sustain after deployment. In the perfect world, which we hope to get, well, I don't know if we'll ever get to it, but as close to it as we can, 7 months is what we're looking for in our deployment. So there'll be a 36-month complete training cycle and deployment cycle and maintenance cycle, because it includes training, maintenance, and deployment, and sustainment. And it's a 36-month cycle, and during that cycle, part of the deployment length will be 7 months. We believe that that's sustainable. But we also have to be mindful that the world has a vote. So that's what you prepare for, that's what you set yourself up for, and then you must be flexible enough and understanding enough to know that that may not always be the reality. We don't want to underestimate our sailors in their ability to understand that, because they recognize that we are, like other services, I would say the Marine Corps and the Navy, are a response force when it comes to combat operations. Things happen in the world and we respond to it, and sometimes that requires us to leave early, to stay late, or to turn around and go back. When those things happen, our sailors get it, they hold their head up high, and they get after it. But in a typical scenario, we hope to be able to have a 36-month cycle for OFRP and to deploy for a period of 7 months. So that's how, I guess in a nutshell, how we're trying to approach it.
Anything else?
I would just say that, when you talk about the 1 to 212, it goes to the absolute fiber of who's serving our nation today. Whether it's our brothers and sisters in the Coast Guard, or whether it's the Navy and the Marine Corps, none of the services have a retention problem, and yet they come. 99% of them are high school graduates, could do anything in the world, but yet they serve. So I think what we have to do is we have to continue to figure out, when they are home, how can we better train them, whether it's cohesion, so they stay together. We get them earlier in the deployment cycle so they can build a team to coalesce amongst each other before they go to the deployment. But at the end of the day, it's the enemy that gets a vote that's going to determine your timeline. But we have to be best prepared so that when we go out to support the combatant commander, that there's truth in advertisement and the capabilities that we bring to the fight. And it's tough. But that's what makes the young men and women of America so incredible, because they come, they meet the needs, and the ball don't get dropped. So I just wanted to add that to what MCPON Stevens said.
Okay.
Jim, if, I hate to
Please,
bust
go ahead.
in, but I
Get
think,
the nickel back.
and you know, I gotta remember what the theme is, right? People first, or mission first, people always, right? We have to remember that. So we talked a lot about stuff, deployments, training, but it's also important that we recognize that we have families that are a part of this as well. And I know that senior enlisted leaders for our services, along with all of our leaders out there that work with us, we have to do our very best at ensuring we understand what the challenges are. We need to listen closely, and we need to go back to our leaders. I need to go back to the CNO and the Chief of Naval Personnel and articulate those challenges. I know they hear a lot of the same things, but we have to go back and talk about it and then figure out how we're going to get after those challenges so that we can continue to meet this high op tempo, because our sailors don't do it alone. It's a team sport, and families are just as important in that aspect as our men and women in uniform. So I know that we work really hard to do that. Thank you.
And I'd also like to add, and this is just a foot stomp for the Coast Guard, that our op tempo is high 24/7 due to our 11 statutory missions. We've got folks in a firehouse mentality at a lot of our Coast Guard units that are very reactive service, that have to be ready to go at a moment's notice, where life and death is that it has to happen. So we have to have our folks that are trained and resilient and able to bounce back from that to get after the next mission that's going to come along tomorrow or the next day or the next day. But it's key, I think, when we talk about, I talk about those older assets, that our people are keeping them running, and they're keeping us making mission, and it's just very impressive. And look, again, I'll just say I'm proud of my Coast Guard that they can remain semper paratus 24/7.
Well, and you have every right to be. As an old machinist mate, keeping a 60-year-old ship running, it's beyond my understanding, quite frankly. You get my hats off to you.
And Admiral Ray, we have old aircraft too, I know. So we'll work on this.
Admiral Masso, please.
Yes, sir. Sonny Masso, U.S. Navy retired. I'd like to begin by congratulating you on the dais for the brilliant leadership that you bring in preparing our men and women to be at the nation's spear, tip of our nation's spear in combat. So thank you for that to begin my question. Most of us have a very similar core value, whether it's honor, courage, commitment, duty, honor, country. We have a continuum in some of our services where we're thoughtful about faith and family and nation, service, shipmate, self. And in that kind of spirit, my question really centers around the trend we're seeing with folks that write books, talk about intimate details of very sensitive combat information and operations. What are your comments generally about this? Are these just rogue people, or is it a trend? Are you happy with it? Just whatever your thoughts are on that, I'd sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Gentlemen?
I'll lead off again.
Go for it.
I hope that what I want to share with you, Admiral, is in some way answers your question. So I won't directly answer it, but I will, I guess, indirectly answer it. I recently wrote a letter to my CPO mess, and I think that the letter and what you mentioned are connected. In the letter to my chief's mess, I said, what is the definition of a chief petty officer? And I said the definition of a chief, in my opinion, because I can't speak for others, but I said, in my opinion, the definition of a chief petty officer is someone who is a quiet, humble, servant leader. Now, if you don't go any further than that, you probably won't be happy with that definition, because what do you mean a chief is quiet, right? And I said not quiet in the sense that we don't speak up and that we don't communicate, but quiet in the sense that when we talk, we don't talk about ourselves, we talk about our people. And I think when we look at some of the folks that have written books in the tell-all, is what is the intention of the book? If the book is to talk about our people and their accomplishments, then one could argue that it's justified, that it's noble. But if the book is to capture attention for yourself and to put yourself in the spotlight, then it becomes very self-serving. And to me, the motives are no longer noble. And humility doesn't mean you think less of yourself, but that you think more of others. And I think in the same context, you can ask yourself, is the book or whatever's being released, is it something that's being done in a manner that's humble, where you're not putting yourself on a pedestal, but you're recognizing others? And then servitude attaches or ties in, you could finish the sentence for me. So quiet, humble servant leader, that's the way I would approach it. And I don't necessarily, I wouldn't condemn all books that are written or that talk about certain things, but I think you have to look at the reason that they're written, what's the story that they're telling, and why is it being told, and is it for a noble reason or reasons of self-gratification? So I don't answer the question, I kind of answer the question with a thought. Thank you.
And I would just add too, when we talk about our core values, particularly when our service, they're all very much alike, I think, but I don't think a young military professional can learn their core values from someone else's book. We all that have served know that those core values mean something different to each and every one of us. Now, the book might help explain it a little bit, but this is all something that, at least in our Coast Guard and with our Chief Petty Officers, that where we came from and where we're going has to be part of their culture when we talk about their core values for us of honor, respect, and devotion and duty, and that we expect them to understand what service before self means, and they're going to figure that out on their own, and it's incumbent upon us to help them get there. And I don't know that the books can teach that. It certainly could be an entertainment value to help someone relate to something, but I think each of us coming into the service, and I know for the Coast Guard, that's something we teach them from every accession point of why those core values are important to the United States Coast Guardmen and how they're going to carry that out through the course of their career, whether it's 4 years or 40 years. But I think those core values are important for each individual to learn on their own and how they employ that.
I don't have anything to add. I'm going to attempt to take these in order, and if I get out of order, I apologize, but I think you were next. Well, he was next. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is BM2 Lauren Perlman. I'm at MSST San Diego Enhanced Team West, and I wrote the question down. This one's for you, Master Chief. As the Coast Guard continues to develop their presence in the DSF community, are there any considerations being made towards specializing the Coast Guardsmen who choose to be a part of it, like units like the MSRT or the MSSDs?
Great question, and yes, I would say right now, and you've heard our Commandant speak about specialization where we have to go. We've already started that with longer tour lengths for a lot of the DSF community, deployable special forces. It's got to be that way. We can't continue to have people do 2- and 3-year hitches with the high-end training that set of skills, and then to let you leave that and go do something else. So I think we're already marching down that road, and I don't see that letting up in the next 3 years. But as we come out with some other things, and I won't mention the 4 letters that people get upset about in the Coast Guard, but there are things in the work now that will fundamentally, I think, change the way we employ our DSF community over the next 3 years anyway.
Could you help us understand a little bit what DSF is and PSF?
DSF is our deployable forces. These are our specialists, if you will, our special forces that do the hook and climbs.
Okay.
They rappel out of helicopters. They have a very high-end capability for doing boardings at sea, and they help with other things, national events where we need high-end technology on the.
Looks like Boats could be one of those guys, right? Is that right, Boats?
He's not a small guy.
I figured that.
Driver.
All right. Good on you.
I'm sorry, it's a 2-part question, and then with
Okay.
keeping in consideration that we're having longer tour lengths, are there any other considerations being made about how we're going to allow people to advance within those ratings?
Right, and with those extended tour lengths, and we have to. I mean, there's no way that we can't. We've got to break down barriers for advancement. If we're going to be serious about specializing certain ratings in our Coast Guard. We have to tear down those barriers. And as we roll out over the next 18 months, a human capital plan, that's the things that we will talk about. How do we do that? How do we break down those advancement barriers for you? How do we entice you to stay in that community at which you're so well trained and not have to have you come out to go do something to punch a ticket so that you can stay in the Coast Guard because you're worried about some workforce retention tool that might be on the horizon for you. We got to take that off the table and let you focus on your job and let you be the expert that you want to be. And I know, having spoken with an awful lot of the DSF folks, that's what they want to be doing. They don't want to do anything else in the Coast Guard. And we got to help you with that so you can stay there.
Yeah, thank you, Master Chief.
Okay.
Thank you both. Sir,
Good afternoon. I'm CTR1 Gothier from Nyack, Maryland. My question's
a
for
little closer to the microphone, please.
My bad. CTR1 Gothier, Nyack, Maryland. My question is for MCPON Stevens. It's in regards to CPO 365. It's pretty interesting the latitude that's been given to the commands to kind of make the program their own. And I've read your remarks where you say your hope is that through the PCS process, there's this cross-pollination of best practices and so on and so forth. So given a long enough timeline, do you see the CPO 365 program kind of settling into a steady state of best practices that is spread across the Navy widely, or do you see it as an ever-evolving process?
Yeah, I certainly don't want it to settle in because then we become comfortable. But to your point, best practices, absolutely, and they'll grow all the time. We need to make sure that what you learn in Nyack, Maryland, that they may not be doing when you go out to, let's say, Nyack, Bahrain. They may not be doing something out there that you did in Maryland. You'll bring that practice with you. They'll examine it, and maybe they'll adopt it, and vice versa. So CPO 365 is certainly designed to leverage the different things that our sailors learn across the globe. I never intended, and nor will I intend, to standardize it because I believe as soon as you do, then you'll stifle creativity and you'll make it very difficult for organizations to expand their capabilities with CPO 365 because you've given them an artificial barrier.
Thank you, Master Chief.
Okay.
Great question. Steve?
Steve Urso, retired Navy. I had the pleasure of listening to Admiral Gortney in his luncheon address today, and I thought he made some points that were very relevant to this discussion. He talked about the 1% that you mentioned, Sergeant Major, and the testament to those people and how hard they work and what they do. And you couldn't take anything away from any of that 1%. I have a two-part question based on that. One is, today there are forces at work trying to drive down our budgets, take away benefits, and make it that much harder for these families and service members that are out there serving today. A lot of those folks in Congress didn't have the opportunity to serve, whether by choice or for other reasons. So they don't necessarily understand the stress and the sacrifices that our service members and their families make today. How do we educate the 99% who are voting these people into Congress and make them understand just how much these sacrifices hurt these families and how much they do to try and get past all that? Relevant to all that, a point the Admiral made was historically there's always budget drawdowns after a war. I think a very unique difference at this time is whether it was the World Wars, Korea, Vietnam, we had a draft, we were drafting people into the service. The fact that these people are all volunteers today, I think that's a different dynamic, and if we continue to take away from them instead of better rewarding them, we're not going to be able to sustain that all-volunteer force. And it's a testament to you guys on that stage that you're able to mold these people into the performers that they are and the leaders that they are. But we got to get them in there first. So how do we educate that 99%? And what are we doing at the congressional level to make sure they don't take away the things that these people earn every day when they're out there serving?
Well, I can start this off a little bit, knowing that just around the corner is hearing season, and MCPON and I, as well as the other service senior enlisted leaders, will sit in front of those congressional leaders and talk about our services and why it's important that they invest in the future of America with those young men and women. So that, along with us continuing to work with the military coalition that work really, really hard to protect those benefits of our men and women that serve. But this is the time of the year where rubber meets the road in D.C., which is a part of our job, is to really sell our services and how well they do. And you're right, the ones that don't serve, have not served. And this will be my first year doing it. MCPON could probably talk a little bit more about how that actually happens. But I know that's an important part of this job is to talk about our people and why not only people, but their families and the services that are provided to their families have to be considered when we get into these weird budget discussions.
I would, whether it's a privilege or what have you, I won't have to worry about testimony. That's going to be my good friend Sergeant Major Green. But I would tell you, my question would how do we, and this is just VanOostrom's thought process here, is I think that what we have to do is we have to make sure that our elected officials realize that our all-volunteer force is really built on trust. It's the same trust that you want your constituents, my conversation would be the same trust that you want your constituents to have in you and your abilities to take it to the next level. What we do is we make sure that we talk to the folks that we assess, that come and step on them yellow footprints, that put their trust in us to make them better, make them whole, and either provide them the opportunities to serve or provide them make themselves better when they go back into their local community. It's built on that trust. So my question, I guess my answer would be, sir, the long way around would be, how do we educate them as we make sure that they know that, hey, it is on trust. And just as the congressional folks that are making decisions that are going to impact those that wear the uniform, they just need to realize that the decisions that they make are going to be those that choose to follow them, to choose to openly follow those orders. And I've kind of gotten on a tangent here, but I think that if we realize that, because that's, if we got to this question about what keeps us up at night, that's what keeps me up at night, is making sure that our force, that we know that we're built on trust. And so kind of run on a tangent here, but I guess getting back to your question is how do we do the 99%? Make sure they realize that it's a trust thing. Just as their towns, their cities, their states trust them. And then as far as the testimony, I'm going to leave it to the heavy hitters to the right to answer.
One thing I've learned in this job, there's what's reported and then there's what is, right? And we got to be careful about kind of the fear-mongering. There's a lot of discussion about what the possibilities are, but there's very little facts to back it up. Because a lot of these decisions that we hear people talking about have not been made. Recommendations haven't even been proposed as of yet. When you look at where we're at today with pay and benefits and other I don't want to use the word entitlements, but let's just say pay and benefits. When you look at where we're at, we're in a pretty good place today. And I believe that because I ask our people. I literally go out and ask them in a crowd, 500, 1,000, to raise their hands and tell me. Nobody's saying they're overpaid. Most of them are not saying they're underpaid. They believe that their compensation is pretty fair today. And there's a lot of talk right now about what the future is going to hold. And there's a lot of concern that it won't be looked at in the right way because we have a number of legislators that may not have military experience. But it has been my experience as I visit with these lawmakers on the Hill and testify for them, that by and large, when I say by and large, I mean the vast majority of them, they care. They care about our families, they care about the men and women that serve, and they want to do right by it. There's a lot of stuff that comes across their desk and our desk. There's a lot of gnashing of teeth and decisions that need to be made. But in the end, what we saw up to this point is that they've pretty much gotten it right. Now, we don't know what the future is going to hold. We've seen the commission has released its report, the Retirement Commission. DOD has put together some working groups to take a look at that and figure out what kind of recommendations we'll make alongside or with or in conjunction. And then you'll go through the whole process of figuring out what you're going to do. And a lot of that will happen on Capitol Hill. We, the senior enlisted leaders, are one voice of many that will go up there and explain and answer questions and ask for and hope that they give us consideration on those things that we ask for. And in the end, they'll make their decisions and they'll vote on it. One thing that I'm pretty confident of, based on what I've seen and heard and the folks that I've talked to, is that we'll continue to get it pretty close to right. The one thing, kind of the thing that's lingering out there, so if you just heard what I said, draw a little box, a little cloud around that conversation and write the word sequestration, right? Because sequestration is the unknown. If you remove sequestration, we're really in a pretty darn good spot. When you put that calculus in there, it's not such a good spot. And you've heard the service chiefs and the chairman testify on sequestration and what that means. So that's almost a separate piece that they've got to work through, and hopefully we can work through that. But given our budget and everything that we're trying to do without sequestration, we're in a pretty good spot. With it, it makes it more difficult. But I'm still convinced that Congress and our leaders in the Pentagon there are absolutely committed to the welfare of our people and their families. And regardless of what happens, they're going to continue to get it pretty darn close to right. So there's what we read and there's what we hear, and it gets us anxious. But we got to pay real close attention to the what is. And the what is when a decision's been made, not what we're thinking about making. So thanks. That was a good question. Appreciate it.
Sir.
Bruce Rennie, Navy League San Diego, with a question for MCPON Stevens. There's been a lot written over the last year or so about LCS and the stresses created on the force, on the staffing levels, training methodology, 3-2-1 deployment cycle. Can you give us your assessment on how Master Chief Metcalf and his team are doing handling that?
Well, we spent most of the day over there with our LCS sailors, and despite what you may hear or read or what people talk about, nobody is vested more in LCS than LCS sailors in the leadership. And it looked to me today, they certainly got some things that they need to work through, but they got a pretty good plan, a pretty good roadmap for how LCS is going to work into, or how they want it to work into the future. This 3-2-1 crew concept, one crew deployed, one crew on haul, and one crew in training. It's a good model. What we got to do is make sure that we man the model correctly. If we can man the model correctly and built in a little bit of wiggle room, as they talked about today, then I think it'll be successful. All you got to do is go on board one of the LCS ships and talk to the crew about what they think about their mission and their platform, and you'll walk away convinced. Because crews make ships work. Ships are steel with technology on them, but it's the crew that makes it work, and if the crew's bought into it, it'll be successful. And if anything, LCS will be successful because of the people, the crews that are on there. But I think they got a good roadmap ahead. I certainly recognize, as do all of our leaders, what the challenges are. Now we just have to get after those challenges. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Moentu Reyes, currently stationed at the Pacific Tactical Law Enforcement Team. My question is, based on technology and everything that's going on, technology is advancing faster and faster, especially regarding information technology. How does a leader leverage technology and focus proper development in order to keep aging workforce relevant, effective, and efficient? And is there anything the older generation can learn from the new generation?
Oh, nothing. Nothing.
Reason I asked that question is because
I was going to share with the MCPOG, I noticed that you're standing there with mobile technology.
That's right. Main reason as far as like the question from the older generation learning from the news, because more than less, you come across the phrase that says, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And that's something that I come across more often than less.
Okay, well, it's good to see you on, and thanks for the question. And yes, we can learn an awful lot from the younger generation. I know I find myself almost on a daily basis trying to learn something new about how we're messaging, at least to our Coast Guard, through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. That is the way that a new generation communicates. And we have already proven, at least in our Coast Guard, that that resonates with our workforce. So us old folks trying to figure out how to leverage that to get you the information you need it's fun, but it can be challenging at times to teach an old dog new tricks, if you will. But I think we absolutely have to go there. It is the way of the future for your generation as you come up, but you've got to help us do that. And you guys have already been really good with that, at least in our Coast Guard, because we've done some things in the last 8 months that the Coast Guard never thought we would do. And I talk about the YouTube and the Facebook and all that social media that not only markets to our workforce, but it also markets to our external partners that watch what the Coast Guard does, and that's where we have found much more success with people understanding that there's Coast Guard men and women serving in Afghanistan and in Antarctica and the Gulf, Persian Gulf. Many folks don't have any idea that that's where our folks are serving or even what they're doing, and we're able to share that out now so that people have a real good idea of globally what the Coast Guard is doing.
You know, and I would say it's continuous. You know, we talk about, you know, we have a little thing we say in the Marine Corps every now and then that you can't get where you need to go by remaining where you're at. And, you know, we look at our enlisted PME and the things that we're doing now and how, you know, we're cutting down on thousands and thousands of dollars because we're getting away from the old binders and we're going to go to, you know, start piloting, passing out tablets. And, you know, and that brings a new challenge too, because you sit there and say, well, everybody's got a computer. Well, no, they don't. Because I don't know what the percentage is. I've heard as high as 40. I don't know if that's true or not, but they don't all have computers because they're all using telephones and tablets now. So then you try, okay, so what's different from being able to use a computer that now, what capability do you lose now because you're not using a laptop, you're using iPhones and you're using tablets and you're using all these other things. So, I mean, it's a continuous process of how do we make things better and in order to keep up because if you don't, your enemy is going to surpass you. Because they're not standing where they're at either. So, great question.
These are, I concur, great comments by both my teammates up here. The two things that I see that make leveraging technology the most challenging for our service is trying to get our mind around the cost and being able to mitigate the security risk. Folks that I've talked to, especially in, you know, just talking primarily in the cyber or the mobile technology domain, the security risk is a big concern and then the affordability of it. But one thing that everybody agrees upon is that this is going to happen. It's just trying to figure out how to make it happen, because if we can't figure it out, then eventually you render yourself irrelevant. You can't let the fear of risk determine your relevance. You absolutely have to sort through it and figure it out. There's a small fraction of people out there that just don't want to see change for the sake of change. Maybe I didn't phrase that right. They don't want to see change because they don't want to see change, right? But most people realize that change is an absolute necessity, because without change, you'll never get better. Without change, you cannot get better. You will only, at best, stay the same, but more than likely, you'll get worse. So you must embrace it. You have to figure out how to mitigate the risk and then work through it. You know, I seen a little sea story. Can I tell a sea story? So there's a picture that was in my office. We were doing some history research, and there was a picture in my office of a ship that was built, I think, around 1893. And it was a steel ship, and it had a steam plant in it, so it was a coal-fired ship made out of steel with steel guns, the whole 9 yards. But it had wooden masts on it that you could rig sails. And I thought to myself, why would you build a steel ship that's steam-powered with wooden masts? And I said, and they didn't even have master chiefs back then, right? Because somebody said, boy, I don't know about this going with steam. We got to have to make sure that we have backup, so we'll put sails on it, only to find out that they never rigged a sail on that ship to get underway with. Well, that's where we're at right now, right? We're building, we're kind of with technology, especially with what you had in your hand. In many ways, it's a steel ship, but we still want to have sails attached to it. We got to figure out how to cut the umbilical cord and go all in, because you can't, that ship was half in, right? And we need to find a way to go all in if we're going to make this work. Good question.
With that being said, as far as the budget and the realigning of, you know, how technology is working now, then is there a fear towards investing into this type of technology that may lead into nothing?
Oh, not with my experience. I haven't seen people afraid to invest in something that'll lead to nothing, because we're advanced enough now and we have a pretty good idea of what works. You just take a look at industry, right? There's a lot of things that they're doing already that all we need to do is leverage that. So we're not stepping into the unknown. Most of this is a known entity, and we just need to figure out what if it will benefit us as well.
And the challenge also when you start talking about technology is the cyber concerns that all the services I'm sure will have, and most have a strategy to deal with that. But when you start connecting immediately with the world through technology, those things you have to be worried about. So that's not just about advancing that technology and sharing with each other, but being a little bit afraid of who else is watching what we're sharing with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Petty Officer Reyes, since you are the youngest Coast Guardman in the room, can you come up here? I want to give you one of my coins.
Yes, sir. Next question.
You know, can I just say while he's walking back, to those that provide that are here with us today, I'm not going to ask you to stand up like Admiral Gorton did, but I will say this. Thank you for what you do, for providing us those resources and those opportunities to help us elevate our game as well. So I want to take that opportunity to say thank you as well.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Scott Kinner again from the Marine Corps Tactics and Operations Groups. MCPON Stevens, those are great comments, and they're exact segue to my question, which is, you know, wooden ships, iron men, wooden ships, steel men, you know, some kind of conglomeration. So are we going to look at our manpower models and think about talent management versus numbers management? I think it's mostly a Marine Corps kind of specific question. Again, coming back to, there's instances where we are, you know, the classic example is you send a young officer out to Monterey for a master's degree and then immediately fire that person 2 years later because they're not promotable. They left their career track. So more with less, force structure is shrinking, op tempo remains high. Are there initiatives, thoughts, or is there even an appetite to take a look at a model basically born with a conscript military force in World War II and look towards a more modern HR talent management model?
Can I start that one? Please. I will tell you, and I would never dare speak for the Commandant or Sergeant Major Barrett, so I cliche this by saying this is VanOostrom's comments. Yes, the Commandant has said, you know, if you've read his campaign planning guidance, he says one of the things that we need to take a look at, and I see you shaking your head, sir, is that we need to take a look at, hey, are we taking it to the next game or to the next level? Are we still doing what we were doing and expecting to get a different result? And so we are taking a look at it. Getting back to the DST question, you know, we're sitting there talking about what is the right thing to do. You know, does it make sense to pump money into a cyber Marine to get him or her to where they are firing on all full cylinders and say, in order for you to be successful, you may need to go be a drill instructor or a recruiter, and we're going to take you out of doing this for 3 years and then bring you back, and you're going to be a staff non-commissioned officer in charge with leading those entrusted to your care. Maybe we need to take a hard look at that. Our special operations guys, maybe we need to take a hard look at that. You know, we've taken steps along the way to develop new MOSs and things to turn around and say, what is the right fix? So, sir, to answer that question, I will say, and I think I'm safe to say this without getting fired, is that we are taking a look at it because we have to be stewards of our nation's monies. And in order to get better, we have to take a look and say, okay, are we doing it right now? Because what was right 42 years ago or 20 years ago or whenever the model came to fruition may not be what we need to do now. So I hope that answers your question, sir.
We're very fortunate right now in our history to have Vice Admiral Moran as our Chief of Naval Personnel. He's forward-thinking, very innovative, and he's had some great conversations with a lot of people about what you just mentioned, talent management. He's talked to the CNO. He and I have had some lengthy conversations about it, and he believes, and I'm in step with him, that the model that we currently have in place is in desperate need of a facelift, that we have to figure out smarter, more innovative ways, more efficient ways to create and recruit and retain the talent that we have in the Navy. This is not a sprint, though. This will be a marathon. This is a journey. This is a big organization, 325,000 people, and yes, I'll say it, with a lot of bureaucracy. And we have to figure out how to best navigate that and do what's right for our people as we go into the future. How we train them, even how we recruit them, how we retain them is going to be vital to the future, because like every generation, the sailors coming before us, the men and women that enlist are going to think differently. They'll still have the same values, but they'll have different expectations, different ways that they believe that we should do business, and we have to make sure that we stay, again, I'll use the word relevant, and we're going to have to take a good hard look at our talent management process, and we are doing that. And we'll see how that plays out into the future. But if we were to have this conversation in 10 years from now, it'd be interesting to see where we are. But I do know this, we won't be where we are today. And we'll be significantly different than we were 10 years ago as compared to today.
And I'll add, for our Coast Guard, which is the smallest service of about 40,000, we've already started this because we simply have to. And it's not just a matter of making our folks master of craft, but it's a money issue. It costs an awful lot of money, and there's an awful lot of investment in our people to not be able to use that talent. And I'll agree, in 10 years, our Coast Guard is going to be a lot different than it is today. And some of the folks in this room will probably still be in our Coast Guard in 10 years. But I believe we will see a very specialized, very focused on that one particular thing that you do well, and a lot of investment in you getting there and us keeping you there. Because we can't continue to operate the way we do, not only from a business standpoint and a money standpoint, but we need you to be the very best. It's a different world that you're operating in, and we can't have our intelligent people coming out doing something different for 3 years, expecting them to go back in because they've got to punch some career ticket. So our talent management, if you will look significantly different, I think, in 10 years. And again, we've already started doing this because we have to save that money.
Very good. I see there's no more questioners from the audience, so I'll begin to wrap up by asking each of you the same question, and to get your final thoughts on what is it that keeps you awake at night in terms of the things that are necessary for you to get your job done. In any order that you three would like to take it. Sergeant Major?
Okay, I'll, you know, because I don't speak as much as these guys, but normally that's a question that we get, and so I kind of thought about what I would say if I was asked that question. I guess what keeps me up at night would be, I guess my bottom line up front would be that we have to live with a core that we can afford, not one that we need. And what I mean by that is kind of elaborated or mentioned that earlier about, you know, for the last, my math's probably wrong here, but for about the last 42, 43 years, we've been an all-volunteer force. And I think, like I said earlier, that's built on trust. And the nervousness is that MCPON Stevens talked about with sequestration. The concern that I have is that it's going to tear at the very fabric and break down that trust that we have and that our Marines and our sailors that support Marines and our employees and families have in us as leaders. You know, we have a reputation of being able to respond quickly and ready to meet our nation's expectations to protect. And my concern is that we'll be the best force we can afford, and again, not the one that we need. In the end, we have less capability and capacity to bring options to our, you know, in the end, we would have less capability and capacity to bring to our military leaders and civilian leaders. And as the Commandant said in his campaign planning guidance, when our nation has options, we have strategic flexibility. When our options are limited, we create strategic risk. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Thank you, Sergeant Major.
Well, two things keep me up at night, and one is we have, I mentioned already, 50, 60-year-old ships. And we send those things to sea for 90 days at a time, and it's scary to think about the unforgiving environment that those folks are working in, maintaining, trying to make mission, doing the very best that they can, not wanting to say no, but it's always a relief to know when they've come back into the dock. So making sure that we provide those folks all the tools that they need so that they don't become a statistic, they don't become a mishap. Those things bother me. But the biggest thing I think that bothers me in the last 8 months, 9 months in this job is our efforts, at least in the Coast Guard, for suicide prevention and suicide awareness. and not on the scale of DOD, but we lost 13 Coast Guardsmen last year to suicide, and I take each and every one of those personally, like could have done something better. What could I have done better? What could I have put out to the chief's mess, to the mess decks that would have made a difference in the lives of that person? It's been a focus of mine over the last few months that we have to get better as a service so that our folks in the field and our young leaders know how to recognize stress on our workforce and help them get help. And as the Sergeant Major mentioned earlier, changing a culture to think it's okay to be not okay and be willing to ask for the help. And we put a lot of money in our services for our people, and getting people to think that it's okay to go find those services without a worry that it's going to impact their career, it's going to impact their advancement or their evals or something that they're not focused on. They ought to be focused on getting better. And again, we put an awful lot of stress on those folks, so and I say we, need to do better to provide those folks that. And when we get there and when we have no more suicides in the military, let alone the Coast Guard, I think it'll make me sleep better at night.
Thank you. MCPON?
I try to keep my job as the MCPON in perspective. It's important to know what's going on operationally, to understand the ships we have, the equipment that we have, to be able to think strategically and think operationally. But ultimately, I remember that I'm a Master Chief Petty Officer, and my job really is our people and their families. All the other things are very, very important and must be understood. Don't think that I ignore those or that they're not important to me. But really, I think when the CNO hired me, he hired me to lead sailors, to support families, and to keep him abreast of those issues, and more importantly, to actually do something about it. When you get beyond 50, Jim, what keeps you
wouldn't know what you're talking about.
What keeps you awake at night is wondering if you're going to wake up in the morning, right? But I'm glad I got a little chuckle, right? But
these chuckle was from everybody out there.
Yeah, everybody 50. Yeah, that's right. Rick said that ain't funny. But the things that I think about that really are troublesome to me, and one is what keeps me awake at night doesn't necessarily keep my sailors awake at night, because their issues and concerns, their priorities, whether we want to believe it or not, are not always in alignment with senior leaders. But I believe the challenge of our time, and we've been getting after this pretty hard now, is sexual assault. Our ability to mitigate sexual assault to the lowest possible number. What is that number? I don't know, but it's lower than it is today. Suicide is troubling. This year, we had more suicides than we'd seen, I believe, in the previous 4 years. The numbers weren't significantly higher, but they were high enough to make it troubling. And one of the things that bothers me is all the energy, the focus, and the effort and the attention that we've paid to it, and yet we still see an uptick in suicide. So I don't know if we'll ever crack that nut, but we just got to keep on trying, because not doing anything is unacceptable. So we got to keep working on that. And then domestic violence is something that always bothers me. You know, my right-hand man down here, Jeff Garrison, Master Chief Jeff Garrison, he and I get a report, or we get a Navy roll-up, a situational report of all the kind of the big ticket items every day. And if you see from a macro level what we see with suicide, sexual assault, and domestic violence, it can be concerning. But again, I remember we're a large force, and the large percentage of our people are not engaged in these type of incidents, but it's still enough to be troubling. Our ability, I guess lastly, or second to last, our ability to retain sailors of the same quality we have today into the future, given the potential challenges that we'll face. We believe the economy is going to pick up a little bit. We're now out of the war for the most part, and contrary to popular belief, a lot of our men and women rose their right hands not for the pay and benefits, but an opportunity to serve in a time of war. And when you remove that element, you remove some element of patriotism. And so there'll be some folks that decide to do something else because that's no longer there. And then our ability to maintain the compensation that they deserve in the future. I wouldn't say it keeps me awake at night, but I certainly think about it. And lastly, probably the greatest challenge that people of my generation and a generation beneath me face is going to be our ability to keep pace with our people. They're thinking faster, they're acting faster, their expectations are higher, and I'll tell you, sometimes I'm glad that I came in when I did and I'm not competing with the men and women that serve today, because to the person, they just blow you away. I'm just so impressed with what I see out there. And it's not, my wife and I had lunch with a young lady in the Pentagon the other day. It was HM2 Torrance. She came in, I met her when I was going through some treatment at Walter Reed, and she escorted me around a few times. So my wife invited her to the Pentagon, and we went down, and this is just a sailor. This is not somebody that we handpicked. She just happened to be somebody that I got to know when I was at Walter Reed. But this is a person who's been in the Navy for 3 years, came in with no college, and she now has her associate's degree. She's a second-class petty officer. She was selected as the BUMED Blue Jacket of the Year down in San Antonio. Her goal is, you know, not very lofty. It's to be the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, right? She's enrolled in school now and continuing her education. She's an LPO in her work center. And my wife looked at me and said, "Where do these people come from?" And I said, "Everywhere." I said, "You think that she's the exception? She is the rule." We see these people everywhere. And I think one of the challenges that we will have into the future is how do we keep them motivated and energized from our positions, because their expectations are going to be extraordinary. So good luck to you folks that are going to be sticking around, right? But thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this may be the hardest thing that I've had to do since I've been retired, to sit up here and keep my thoughts to myself pretty much. As each question was asked, I found myself fighting the urge to respond and provide my thoughts on the project, or on the question, only to be relieved that I didn't have to do that after I heard their answers. They are eloquent, they are strategic, their ability to articulate questions should leave no doubt in your mind as to why they're operating at the level they are. And I would echo what Mike just got through saying. To be in competition of any kind against them and all those that they lead today, I think MCPON number 12, now he's an even-numbered MCPON. Us odd-numbered MCPONs are a little different. But they answered questions much better than MCPON 12 ever could have answered, and probably better than MCPON number 9. So gentlemen, I'm humbled, I'm honored, and I thank you for the time that you put into this and for sharing your thoughts with all these folks. Let's give them a hand, please.